All right, let's get started. I want to welcome everyone joining us here tonight for a special webinar from the Raytheon Anti-War Campaign and Massachusetts Peace Action. For those of you who don't know about Mass Peace Action, we are the largest grassroots peace organization in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We exist to fight the evil of militarism. We have several areas of work. We work for nuclear disarmament, to stop intervention in Latin America, to prevent a new Cold War with China and Russia. We fight for Palestinian rights, for racial justice, to fight climate change. And we also struggle to end war in the Middle East. And the subject that we're going to be talking about tonight is the US Saudi UAE war in Yemen. There have been recent major developments in this long struggle to end what is the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world, the war in Yemen. Just last Thursday, President Biden made his first major foreign policy address at the State Department, and he declared his commitment to end the war in Yemen. And he announced that he was going to halt all relevant arms sales of offensive weapons to Saudi Arabia. And while we welcome this, and it is a major victory for the peace community and for activists who have been working for years to end this brutal war and really our participation and facilitation of the war crimes committed against the people of Yemen. But we are afraid that it falls short of some of the commitments that President Biden made on the campaign trail. So we're all gathered here tonight to celebrate the victory that we have achieved, but also to ensure that it means truly what we hope that it does, that relief will be coming to the people of Yemen who desperately need it. So tonight we're going to be joined by two experts who have been working on this issue for years. Professor Shireen Aladi and Hassan El Tayeb. We really want to present this program tonight as a dialogue. So comments at the beginning will be brief, and then we're going to get right into the question and answer session. We want to give time to you to ask your questions of Shireen and Hassan about what these updates mean for our work and what we can do going forward to ensure an immediate end to this war and relief for the people of Yemen. So first up, I would like to introduce Professor Shireen Aladimi, one of the leading advocates for an end to the war in Yemen, where she was born. Since 2015, she's played an active role in raising awareness about this war, and her work continues to encourage the political action necessary to completely end the US role in the war in Yemen. Shireen is an assistant professor of education at Michigan State University. Thank you so much for being with us again. Shireen, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for hosting me again. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. And, you know, this is going to be a different sort of talk because for the first time in 6 years, we have some positive news. We finally have movement. And I really want to start by thanking every single one of you for years of solidarity with Yemen, for years of working, protesting, getting me to do these talks. You were the first people to invite me to do a public talk. here we are, 6 years later, it's working. We still have quite a ways to go, but I just genuinely want to thank every single one of you for all of your efforts throughout the years, even when it seemed really hopeless and bleak. So, Brian, if you could let me share my screen, please. I just have just a few slides to update us on the situation in Yemen. Specifically update us on what the Biden announcement means.
Try now.
Yes, thank you. So, and what it would look like moving ahead. And then I'll hand it over to Hassan, who will speak more about that process. Just a reminder for everybody about why we really are in Yemen. And I want to highlight Yemen's strategic importance once again. This is Bab el-Mandeb Strait, where 6.2 million barrels of oil and oil products travel per day to Europe through Suez Canal over here in Egypt and to Asia. And so this is a really important chokehold, and it's important for shipping lanes. And the U.S. has always had, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, oil dependent and oil producer. They've always had a government in Yemen who was pro-Saudi and pro-US. And for the first time in 2014, they were seeing that with the rise of the Houthis, who are explicitly anti-US interventions and anti-Saudi interventions in Yemen, they knew that this was going to be bad news. And so they rushed to intervene in a civil conflict, despite the fact that Yemenis were already negotiating among themselves toward a peaceful revolution, even after the Houthi takeover of Sana'a. So I wanted to remind us about why the U.S. is there and why support for the Saudi-led coalition has persisted. The other thing to note, of course, is the Iran deal. The timing of this was early 2015, right after the Iran deal, and the Saudis were upset that they didn't have a say in this process, and so the U.S. Kind of jumped to support them at the time. But it wasn't the only reason. And I also want to highlight, again, just as a reminder, U.S. involvement in Yemen specifically. The U.S. trains UAE and Saudi pilots and soldiers. They repair and maintain vehicles and aircraft, even ones that weren't sold by the U.S. to the Saudi-led coalition. They supply approximately 70% of Saudi Arabia's weapons. They help with targeting. And we know that targeting in Yemen, the U.S. called targeting in Yemen, the targeting of civilians, widespread and systematic in a leaked 2016 report. They provide logistical support, intelligence sharing, and possibly are involved in enforcing the naval blockade on Yemen. So this is massive involvement. This is everything except pulling the trigger. And until 2018, they were refueling Saudi and UAE jets midair. So the updates. Since taking office, Biden, the first announcement was a review of weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, as well as the sale of F-15s to the UAE that was, kind of pushed through at the very last minute by the Trump administration. The other thing the Biden administration announced was an end to offensive operations in the war in Yemen, and I'll get to that specifically in a minute. They reversed the FTO designation. So another thing that the Trump administration did under Pompeo, on his last day of office, basically, was to designate the Houthis as foreign terrorists. U.S. law prohibits any organization, any NGO from working with terrorists. So this would have starved 70% of Yemenis, no doubt. And so reversing the designation was an important step. And the Pentagon announced that they were going to stopped intelligence sharing with the Saudi-led coalition. So these are all the major announcements that we've had in the last week or so. Questions remain, right? And so let's look at the Obama administration's statement in 2015. This was the statement that entered us into the war. So the Obama administration said, in response to the deteriorating security situation, Saudi Arabia, Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC members, and others will undertake military action to defend Saudi Arabia's border and to protect Yemen's legitimate government. As announced by GCC members earlier tonight, they are taking this action at the request of Yemeni President Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. By the way, he's still in Saudi Arabia in exile all these years later. The other part of this statement was that the U.S. coordinates closely with Saudi Arabia and our GCC partners on issues related to their security and our shared interests. In support of GCC actions to defend against Houthi violence, President Obama has authorized the provision of logistical and intelligence support to GCC-led military operations. This was it, a statement on the very first day of the war. And this is what got us into this. So the pretext here is defending Saudi Arabia's borders and specifically from Houthi violence. Biden's announcement in 2021, he said this war has to end. And then he went on to say, we are ending all American support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen, including relevant arms sales. At the same time, Saudi Arabia faces missile attacks and UAV strikes and other threats from Iranian-supplied forces in multiple countries. We are going to continue to help Saudi Arabia defend its sovereignty and its territorial integrity and its people. So I've bolded these two areas because they both statements kind of highlight the importance of defending Saudi Arabia from Iran-allied groups, which are implied here are the Houthis. For me, this is concerning. If we're going back to the same framing that got us into this war, this is very concerning. If the whole pretext of this was a defensive operation, what does it mean to now also say that we are doing this for defensive purposes? So some questions that I have are, what distinguishes offensive versus defensive? That's yet to be known. What about relevant arms sales? Why not all arms sales? Why did he have to include disqualify relevant arms sales? The other part of the statement that I didn't include was that he said they're going to be working with USAID, and it wasn't clear if they were going to restore or expand aid to Yemen through USAID, which was cut to Houthi-controlled areas under the Trump administration. The other thing that we have an answer for is that Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, made it clear that this does not extend to actions against AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which are actions we undertake in service of protecting the homeland and protecting American interests in the region and allies and partners. The drone strikes, the parallel war against terror, it is unfortunately authorized by the AUMF, which was passed shortly after 9/11. And so that war continues to operate in parallel, and it's not covered under this order. Moving forward, here's what I think that the US's role should be. It's great that Biden is saying that he wants to end support for the war. I don't think we should take him at his word. We've unfortunately heard from different US administrations that the war in Iraq was going to end, that the war in Afghanistan was going to end by 2014, and it hasn't happened. And so I think that Congress here needs to enter the game and use its legislative authority to make sure that they provide oversight to ensure every form of US complicity that I've outlined above ends. There's a lot of talk about Saudi Arabia, not enough about the UAE. The UAE likes to claim that it's no longer in the war, that it's pulled out its forces from Yemen. This cannot be further from the truth. I think the reviewing of F-15s is a positive step, but the UAE's role is much more, it's as involved, if not more involved, than the Saudi Arabian role. So we need to be talking and focused on them as well. Biden announced that he was appointing Tim Lenderking as an envoy to Yemen. I think Lenderking's role can be to work with US allies, so the UK, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, other countries that are involved in this war, to end their own involvement in Yemen. I don't think it's up to the US to be involved in peace negotiations among Yemenis, given that the US was a warring party in this, and has taken such a destructive role in Yemen. So I think it's really up to Yemenis to negotiate peace among themselves, but this can only happen, of course, without foreign intervention or oversight. So, and I think finally, expanding aid is the bare minimum here. What we should be talking about is accountability and reparations for the destruction of an entire country, frankly, starving millions of people, bombing infrastructure, blockading this country for 6 years, putting 30 million Yemenis' lives through trauma and pain and suffering. I think the very least the US owes are reparations. So this is what I'm thinking right now. Again, I want to thank you all for your continued solidarity. Feel free to reach me at my MSU email or on Twitter, where again, I focus my work on Yemen on Twitter. But I will turn it over to Hassan, and then of course I want to hear your questions.
Thank you so much, Shireen, for your expertise and for that information. As Shireen just said, we want to turn it over now to Hassan Al-Tayyab, He is legislative representative for Middle East policy of FCNL, the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And he has been working to end the war in Yemen now for over 4 years. Hassan has graciously agreed to be with us today to give us the view of what is happening on Capitol Hill and how we can influence the situation in DC. Hassan, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you to MAPPA for putting this on. You don't have to twist my arm to come back to Massachusetts. I grew up in Plymouth. Maybe some of you already know that, but I love Massachusetts. I also just want to, say thank you to Shireen for her thought leadership. I wouldn't be sitting in this Zoom box in Washington D.C. right now if it wasn't for Shireen. She first taught me about the Yemen war and got me activated, and as she has done to so many other people around the country. And I just feel so blessed to know her and to learn from her. So she went over a lot, and I think, yeah, there's a lot that has happened, and I echo her sentiment that this is really a major win for the peace movement. This is something that would not have happened without amazing activists like folks at the Massachusetts Peace Action, other Peace Action affiliates, faith leaders, Code Pink. To shout out to Pocky. I see her down here. And just so many amazing activists that came out and folks that participated in this, historical day of action virtually. I mean, it was just so much went into it, and your emails, your phone calls, the letters, the protests, it all mattered, and you all matter, and it's just so wonderful to be a part of this with you all. So there's a lot that Shireen laid out, and a lot of remaining questions. And right now, a lot of my advocacy on the Hill is to try to get answers to those questions. So there's a letter in the works right now with a few members, and we're trying to ask point blank a lot of these different things. I just want to go over some of the questions that we're sort of asking. What does military intelligence, logistical, or other activities, what were these things that we were doing when Biden took office? Because we really don't know. What does the administration view as things that count as offensive or defensive operations? Same thing with the weapons. We need to know. I've heard that the National Security Council, they're giving themselves till about April to really decide what's counting as offensive and what's counting as defensive. I think the precision guided munitions are going to be in that offensive list, but there are things like the F-35s and the drones, the Reaper drones that we were selling to the UAE. We're not really sure if those are going to be in that permanently banned class of weaponry to Saudi and the UAE. So our pressure right now is really important. We don't really know about the U.S. role in the blockade. That really needs to be made clear. There was a GAO report that got passed through the NDAA, and, that's good, but that's not going to be done for another year. So, we need to really, pick up the pressure. And I think the blockade is something that we don't talk enough about, and it's really a major factor in the human suffering going on here. So those are just a few of the things that we need answers to. One thing that we're asking of the House Foreign Affairs Committee is to have a hearing with Secretary Blinken and Tim Lenderking to come to Congress and have a public hearing about all of this and be able to air this out in public with members of Congress asking key questions. So that's definitely an ask for folks on the Hill right now. Senator Warren, Senator Markey should be asked to, ask for that. We want to legislate a permanent end to U.S. support and weapon sales to the Saudi-led war in Yemen. We have, an executive order which is about as flimsy as the piece of paper it was written on. Executive orders don't survive. As we've seen, it's wonderful that they're tearing up the Muslim ban, ending U.S. support for the offensive operations in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. But there's another administration. We want to make sure that's bound into law, and I think we have an obligation to make sure that we never do this again. And so I think the National Defense Authorization Act and DoD approach, right, we need to come up with a collective strategy in the peace movement to make sure that there are provisions in these must-pass bills that do a permanent end to U.S. support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. I'm going to be on the Hill making sure, doing my darndest to try to make that happen. But, it's all of us that needs to really come out and say that this has to be legislated. There are other things. I think a next low hanging fruit. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. After the FTO designation was lifted, the next thing that we need to do is restore funding to northern Yemen, to where the Houthi held territory is. I mean, that to me seems like a really obvious next step for the Biden administration. I think FCNL led a letter with about 100 groups, and we're going to try to re-up that next week and try to get that to the Hill. But yeah, calling on the administration and calling on members of Congress to restore and expand aid, to put pressure on the Saudi UAE coalition to also meet and expand their funding pledges, all absolutely critical. There's other things that we're looking for as well. We want a new UN Security Council resolution. Members of Congress on the House Foreign Affairs Committee could do a non-binding resolution basically calling for that, and asking that there be a more balanced UN Security Council resolution that doesn't just single out the Houthis, but calls on an end to military support for all warring parties, and making sure we call for an end to the blockade, an end to the obstruction of humanitarian assistance, and calling for a nationwide ceasefire. I could keep going on, but I wanted to maybe just end with one last piece. Is I completely echo what Shireen was saying, that we need accountability. We got to make sure that there are we have to bring down the human suffering in Yemen, but we also have to work to prevent future Yemens. We have to work to prevent future unauthorized wars, and that's going to take a lot of work and structural reforms, like fixing the Arms Export Control Act to make sure that joint resolutions of disapproval can be privileged in the House, and we actually get votes on these things to make sure that Congress has an oversight role, and strengthening things like the War Powers Act. I don't want to go too much on. I've given you all a laundry list of stuff to do, and it's because Yemen can't wait. There's just a gazillion things that need to be done, and I just want to leave you with the urgency that we took to do the advocacy that got us to this moment needs to continue, and it almost we almost need to double down at this point, because the human suffering is as great as it's been since the start of the war.
Thanks, Hassan. I really appreciate your input. I want to encourage everyone to ask your questions and to ask them live if you would like. You can put them in the chat if you wish. But if you'd like to ask a question live, you can click the participants button at the bottom of your screen and then click raise hand, and we'll know that you have a question, and we'll throw the floor open to you. So you can ask Hassan and Shireen your question. But I will get it started. One of the things that I was hoping was that President Biden would sort of use his influence over the Saudi government, and really the threat of removing support and removing not just offensive arms sales, but all weapon sales to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. One of the things that concerns me is that right after he committed to an end to the war in Yemen, he immediately pivoted and committed the United States to the defense of Saudi Arabia. On the campaign trail, he said that we needed to make Saudi Arabia a pariah nation for what it was doing, human rights violations in Saudi Arabia and, of course, in Yemen. And that was quite different from what I heard him announce at the State Department. So thoughts on that disconnect?
You know, maybe I don't know if Shireen wants to jump in here. Uh, I I agree that he's definitely softened his tone. You know, campaigning is way different than governing, and we see that front and center. You know, I think our work on the advocacy side, we really need to ramp it up because the National Security Council, they're having internal debates about what a lot of these things mean, like what's offensive and defensive. So, you know, I completely agree, and that's exactly why we need to put pressure on Congress. One thing I didn't mention is that there's resolutions of disapproval that we can start collecting co-sponsorships now for Chairman Meeks, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, HJ Res 15 and HJ Res 16. If your House members haven't co-sponsored them, you know, that's critical. And I think that's going to help put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to say, wow, we really need to end all, you know, all support to the Saudi Arabia and the UAE if we, you know, keep building that pressure. I'll let Shireen say more.
Yeah, I agree with Hassan. MBS is the same MBS who killed Khashoggi, who started this war, who slaughtered Yemenis, who starved them for 6 years. And so for Biden to now say that, you know, of course we're going to continue supporting Saudi Arabia, maybe Obama would have gotten away with that 6 years ago when the Saudis weren't really seen as such a destructive force in the region. But we shouldn't let Biden get away with that, you know, with that status quo of, well, everything is going to continue to be as it always was with our relationship with Saudi Arabia. So why should U.S. Taxpayers fund this defense of Saudi Arabia? I think that's one of the things that we should be asking and pushing back on. No, this isn't a given that the U.S. should support and defend Saudi Arabian territory. You know, they were both in this together, and they both need to end. And ending means stopping everything to the Saudis and to the UAE.
Thanks, Shireen. I see that Packy Wyland has her hand up. So go ahead. Yep. Unmute yourself. The floor is yours.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for doing this webinar, and it's great to see you, Hassan. And of course, Shireen, it's always wonderful to hear you. I'm just curious, what about our senators? Have we reached out to Warren and Markey? I mean, they're both powerhouses in their excuse me, in their programs. We've got the Foreign Affairs, the Foreign Relations. Markey is on that committee, and Elizabeth Warren is on Armed Services. So have you all reached out to them in those capacities?
So one thing, thank you for that, Pocky. I have reached out to them, and we are getting ready for a hearing for Samantha Power, who's going to run USAID. And right now, a good ask for Senator Markey would be to say, we want you to ask these really important questions about restoring and expanding aid to all parts of Yemen right now. You know, one of the big asks I had was the FTO designation. Things are rapidly changing. I'm so glad we don't have to lobby on that right now. But that's a great ask for Senator Markey. On Warren, let's have her help us get provisions to the NDAA to do a permanent end to military support to the Saudi UAE led coalition and end weapon sales, and they can both play a major role in that.
So have you spoken to them about this, their staff about this?
I have not. It's really early on the NDAA side, but I don't think it is too early. I think folks should be reaching out. I've just, you know, I just haven't reached out to them specifically, but I think it's a really good idea.
All right, mass peace action. Here
And-
we go. Thank
and-
you.
Thank you so much, Pocky. And one thing, you know, it goes without saying, but Senator Reid, your neighbor to the south, the soon-to-be chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, is another really important person to pressure to do this, you know, to do this legislation. So I would encourage folks to reach out to him, and then Rep. Trahan, I believe. Glenn's on the call. That would be a great ask. I know I owe you an email, so sorry I haven't gotten back. It's been a busy week. But that was what I was going to say is, reach out to Rep Trahan and make sure that she's on board with, legislating a permanent end to the war.
And let's actually open it up to Glenn. I know Glenn has done some great organizing up in the Lowell area on this issue specifically, reaching out to Congresswoman Trahan and meeting with her. Glenn?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being here. I guess you kind of already answered my question about legislating, about what the ask should be for just members of Congress and Trahan specifically, like legislating a permanent end to the war. Right now, when you were talking, I got a list of 12 different things that you mentioned about like what does the administration view as offensive defensive operations? What's the U.S. role in the blockade? We need a committee hearing on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So there's a lot. So I guess
I was a teacher for a while. I'm used to giving homework. Shireen probably gives a lot of homework too. She probably gives more homework than I do.
But is there a top three, just for prioritizing, or maybe that's, I guess, legislating an end to the war and preventing future wars in practice? Maybe that's the priority one.
Yeah, I would say, I would put it like this. I would say humanitarian aid right now because, people are starving to death in Yemen right now. And we've cut off humanitarian aid to about 70% of the country. So really, I would say number one is let's get, these questions asked by Senator Markey of Samantha Power when she comes through for that hearing. I think that's critical. And then I would say then urge your members to call for a permanent end in the NDAA and DoD approach to stop to legislate an end to weapon sales and military support. So that would be mine. Although Shireen, she might have other thoughts as well.
No, I agree. Restoring aid, like I said, bare minimum, and that's urgent. Like families need it now. They don't have food for tomorrow. Like it's urgent, and ending all support. So we don't know the extent of U.S. support. Like we alluded earlier, we don't know their role, for example, in the blockade. But whatever it is, and that needs to come out eventually. But just ending every form of U.S. Assistance to Saudi-led coalition, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and to legislate it, to not rely on Biden's word, to legislate it and to see it through, to make that process transparent and to hold them accountable for it.
Thanks. And we're particularly concerned here in Massachusetts about the war in Yemen because of the presence of Raytheon Technologies, which is one of the largest weapons manufacturers in the world. That's why we started the Raytheon anti-war campaign to link Yemen and Massachusetts, to make people realize that this country on the other side of the world is deeply linked to decisions that are being made right here in Massachusetts. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Paul Shannon, the founder of the Raytheon Anti-War Campaign. Paul, go ahead.
Thanks, Brian, and hello, Hassan and Shireen. Nice to see you again. To me, the most important thing right now is to immediately end the bombing and end the blockade. That just has to be at the top of our demands. But beyond that, I want to know what peace looks like. I would like to know, if either of you know, Shireen, I assume especially, what is the Houthi negotiating position? What type of peace agreement can actually end this war? What are we pushing here, as opposed to just nice words about how the war is going to end and U.S. is going to negotiate a peace and all that? What role do the Houthis have to have? What do they say has to happen for their operations to be able to end, and that the country be on on the road to a political settlement?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Paul. So if we wind the clock back to late 2014 when the Houthis took over Sana'a, the Hadi government and the Houthis and the at the time they were called the Hirak, the separatists, and the government, kind of like the Saleh was around at the time as well, and so his people in government, and the Islahis, who are the Muslim Brotherhood faction in Yemen, they were all able to come together and create a unity government, and they were talking about peace even after the Houthi takeover of Sana'a. And so Saudi intervened when Yemenis were willing to sit down and talk to one another, despite having gone to war with one another. And that's what people don't understand about Yemeni society. It's deeply tribal. The alliances shift. At a time, Houthis and Saleh were able to work together despite years of war. At a time, Saleh forces switched sides to working with the Hadi government, and so forth. And so these alliances work because of tribal negotiations, because of history. Because at the end of the day, they have to learn to live with one another. What doesn't work is foreign intervention, and we've never seen a civil war this destructive in Yemen, and it's only because of foreign intervention in Yemen. When these foreigners, there is no war on U.S. soil, but the U.S. is involved in Yemen. There is no war on Saudi soil, but the Saudis are involved in Yemen. And so I think for the Houthis, they're not going to agree to a UN resolution that tells them to give up everything that they've, like all their weapons, give up all the territories, and go back to their province in northern Sana'a, which the Saudis destroyed. That's what the Hadi government wants, and that's what the Saudis want, and it's not going to happen. And so there has to be a recognition that they are the de facto rulers in northern Yemen, whether we like it or not, whether the US or Saudi or Hadi or SDC, whether people like it or not, they are the de facto government in Yemen. And they will have to negotiate with them as a government, not as a fringe group, right? Given how many people live in northern Yemen, 70 to 80% of the population live in Houthi-controlled areas. This is gigantic. And the Hadi government is not even based in Yemen. They formed this government. They landed in Aden in January, and they were just bombing in the airport. Like, that's how he wasn't elected either, right? So it's not like he has a lot of legitimacy despite the UN resolution. So I think they're probably going to want to negotiate if the blockade and the bombing has been lifted, like you said. Without lifting a blockade and without stopping the bombs, then I don't think they're going to be ready to negotiate. But when negotiation comes, after the blockade has been lifted and after the bombs have ceased, I think that has to happen among Yemenis, possibly negotiated with parties like Oman, who wasn't involved in this war, who didn't play a destructive war, who didn't sell weapons to any party. I can't think of other countries that haven't benefited of this war, from this war, sorry. So I think it has to come down to Yemenis negotiating among themselves for some kind of peace agreement. And I'm confident that they'll come to it without foreign intervention, even though it might take some time.
Thank you.
Thanks. I actually see in the chat a question from Amir about what the current state of the blockade is. He had heard through reporting that some of the effects of the blockade had been lifted about a year ago. Can you tell us more about the current state of the blockade of food and medicine coming into Yemen?
I could take a stab at this, and Shireen, please jump in if I miss anything. I just looked at the UN commodity report, and some things have stabilized. Food and medicine have actually stabilized via the blockade, but they've really reduced fuel. Fuel is down to like 1 to 4% of what Yemen needs as of the fall of last year. And what's terrible is it's so arbitrary. It's based on what Saudi Arabia wants at any given moment, like to choke off the medicine, choke off the food, choke off the fuel. And now hospitals are operating at reduced capacity, and healthcare delivery is really being impacted during a global pandemic. And so, yeah, and obviously, this was on top of the aid suspension and the fact that 75% of UN programming was cut. World Food Programming was cut. WHO was cut. So massive shortages of what Yemen needs. And, so I completely agree with Paul that the blockade, and agree with Shireen that the blockade is just, so devastating in the country and needs to be a major priority.
Shireen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo Hassan. And also commercial trade it's still reduced, severely reduced. And so Yemenis before the war used to import 90% of their food, and they're not able to import that anymore. And so now aid organizations have to provide the aid because the country has been dependent on aid. And now, we've cut aid to aid organizations. Pompeo did it out of spite through USAID, but others did it because of shortages to the pledges from the warring parties, right? And so people who have now become dependent on aid don't have as much aid as before. But also, even if the markets are stocked, the inflation has been so bad that people can't afford it. They moved the central bank from Sana'a to Aden, and then they have like this bifurcated currency now, where it's actually more stable in northern Yemen, where the Houthis control it, than in the south. But this bifurcated currency has caused the massive inflation. The rial used to be 250 US dollars 6 years ago. Now it's something like $800-900. And so people can't really afford what's out there. So I think these are all effects of the blockade. And Amir, you mentioned that, when you type blockade Yemen, it'll say it was lifted in November 27, or, was lifted in early 2018. Well, that's talking about the total blockade, which was imposed in 2017 completely. At some point, they shut all the ports, all the imports, all the medicine, everything in 2017. And then they lifted that. And so people think that the blockade has been lifted, but it hasn't. There's still massive restrictions. And we see that mostly through fuel right now, which is affecting everything, right? Water pumps, hospitals, generators, everything that, sanitation systems. So then you have things like cholera. And it affects so many things in society, but besides driving and transportation and fuel delivery, food delivery.
If I could just say one more thing on top of that, yeah, I completely agree with Shireen. Right now, you've also got UN-approved ships being, prevented from offloading their supplies, and food's rotting inside like Hodeidah Harbor. Sometimes these ships are kept in the harbor, unable to offload for 100 days, 200 days, which is insane. So yeah, it's terrible.
Thanks. I actually have a question for Shireen. You mentioned during your presentation that the announcement of the Biden administration, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, explicitly said that this would not apply to operations against Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, something that is maybe not as widely known. Is that the United States has been bombing Yemen actually since 2002. So my question is, do you think it's necessary for us to end absolutely all bombing in Yemen? And does that mean that we need to fight to repeal the 2001 authorization of the use of military force?
Yes, short answer is yes. I mean, how would people like it if Russia comes and decides that there are some people here who are terrorists and we're going to take them out on US soil? That's what happens in Yemen. It comes from this, racist point of view that Yemenis are just a bunch of terrorists in waiting, like they're just going to turn into terrorism because they're poor. It doesn't happen that way. The biggest victims of AQAP are Yemeni civilians. And the most successful groups who have been able to get rid of AQAP in regions have been Yemenis, specifically the Houthis. They just had a major battle with Al-Qaeda in Al-Bayda province and got rid of them there. You won't find Al-Qaeda presence in northern Yemen. So Yemenis have the biggest stake in getting rid of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. We don't need another country coming in and in the name of, war and terror, kills children, kills civilians, kills these suspected terrorists' neighbors and their cousins and their grocer and all of that, right? They've disrupted Yemeni society. They've created all of this trauma and destruction. But it's perfectly legal under American law. And both the Bush administration and the Obama administration were able to conduct drone strikes in Yemen with the support of former President Saleh, who gave them the green light to do that. And if Hadi is restored to power, he will certainly give them the green light to continue to do that. But here on our end in the US, we need to be stopping. We need to revoke the AUMF, which has been used to, terrorize civilians mostly and execute even, American citizens in Yemen, but also in Somalia and Pakistan and Afghanistan and different places.
It's like, how would we feel if Canada started bombing the Proud Boys? I mean, I don't like them, but it's just crazy to think that we can just go into Yemen and start bombing. And we've been doing it for decades at this point. And I completely agree. We need to repeal and not replace the 2001 AUMF. Barbara Lee has legislation on the books right now. I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but make sure your members have co-sponsored.
Yeah, that's HR 255 and 256 for the 2002 AUMF, if I'm not mistaken, the invasion of Iraq authorization. That is obviously our position at Peace Action, and I agree completely with how Shireen and how you just framed it. It really is part of American exceptionalism, and when you think about another country having military operations, killing American citizens here in the United States, it seems it would be completely unacceptable to us. It is just an unfortunate byproduct of this idea of American exceptionalism. So I'll just continue along that line with you, Hassan. The Democratic Party platform agreed to by President Biden committed to an end to forever wars. What do you think the prospects are for getting rid of these authorizations? What do you think the prospects are for repealing the 2001 AUMF before we get to the 20th anniversary of the Afghan war?
Great question. I think it's going to be difficult. I really do. I do think there are some places we can make some progress. One, I think the 2002 Iraq AUMF is particularly vulnerable. That was the AUMF that the Trump administration used to assassinate Soleimani. I think there's a likelihood that we could get that through the NDAA and signed into law. It's going to be really difficult. That's one. I think there are folks, Chairman McGovern, he's looking at doing some war powers reform, strengthening the War Powers Act, strengthening the Arms Export Control Act to make it easier for Congress to end, block weapon sales and prevent, wars. So I think those are all really critical. I think, working to end and permanently end the war in Yemen is a really important first step. Restoring the Iran nuclear deal, I think we're going to make some progress. But as far as ending forever wars, that's going to be a real challenge unless we can build a critical mass in our peace movement. I think it's possible, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Next, I see that
Notice I didn't say he's going to do it on his own. The only way it's going to happen is if we make him do it.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Next, I want to turn the floor over to Louise. Go ahead with your question, Louise.
Thank you. I was wondering about, since Lloyd, how is that playing into what's happening? Nobody really talks about that. And he seems as though he's being pro-peace, but I just have this, it just doesn't quite make sense. And I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are on that.
I think we lost your audio there for a second, but your question is the influence of the new Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, who comes right off the board of directors of Raytheon Technologies.
If I may, one thing that I agree, it's really problematic to have people going from the board of directors at Raytheon and then becoming DoD secretary, no doubt. Super problematic. We have to really, look from top to bottom how we make these decisions. one thing I have been in, I don't want to say impressed, but heartened to see that press reports indicated that Lloyd Austin was an early skeptic of the Yemen war. So that's one thing I will say to his credit, and he was skeptical of the no-fly zone. He took a lot of pushback in a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing with McCain. But the larger question you're raising is super important about how the weapons industry
Right.
has really taken over parts of our government. And and it's not just campaign contributions, it's think tanks, it's, spreading the military industrial complex into different districts and states around the country strategically, and, hinging so many jobs on it. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I just going to tip my hat to the Raytheon anti-war campaign and the work that you're doing there. And I don't know if you've been, collaborating with people in Arizona, but given the votes that we just saw from Senator Kelly and Senator Sinema, we got a little work to do out in Arizona as well.
Thank you.
Yes, and we do know that a lot of the offensive weapons that were used in Yemen were produced out there in Arizona. They're headquartered here in Massachusetts, but those weapons made by Raytheon are made out in the Tucson area. I see, Paul, you have your hand up. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would like to, I don't see any other questions right now, so I'm going to take this opportunity.
Go ahead.
I'd like to ask the two of you to kind of read the tea leaves here in terms of what is going on here. Yemen policy takes place in the context of a whole region. Is it coming from Saudi basically having lost the war and Biden trying to clean things up here? Is Biden really upset with the Saudis and really is going to have to twist their arm to end the war? How does it obviously relate to the Iran nuclear deal and to the whole U.S. strategy in the Middle East of setting up which allies and the whole focus against Iran and all that? Is there what does this particular evident change in policy really mean? I'd be interested, for instance, if either of you know what Ro Khanna thinks about this, about what Biden has done. Has he said anything about what he thinks is going on? But I'd just like the two of you to kind of speculate, without going on a record of what you think is happening here.
Shireen, I don't know if you want to jump on that Leviathan of a question.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I also, before the meeting ends, someone asked in the chat, Adam, you asked if the PowerPoint can be circulated. I'd be more than happy to send that over to Brian, and I'll include a couple of resolutions that we talked about as well. But, thank you for that question. Look, we're dealing with Biden. Biden is an empire man, right? Like, he has been in government for 50 years, has helped propagate U.S. interests in this really toxic, violent way across the world. He supported the Iraq War. It was his right idea to expand drone warfare in Afghanistan. In fact, wanted to replace all U.S. soldiers with just drones in Afghanistan. And so, and in his foreign policy announcement, you could hear some of the ways, the rhetoric in which he's talking about America is back, right? And I'm sure he wants more presence in the Middle East in some areas. I'm sure he's not happy about Trump withdrawing some troops from Syria, for example. So I don't count on Biden to, and he was part of the administration that started this war. So I don't think any pulling back from the war in Yemen is because of the humanitarian crisis or because of anything. It's because we made it very inconvenient for the Democrats to support this war, right? Like, we showed the horrors of this war over the past 6 years. And it's really difficult to justify continuing any kind of presence in Yemen. And so it's kind of an embarrassing situation is how I see it. But is he going to give up U.S. interests in Yemen? Like I said, that's a major chokehold. Like, that's, the shipping lanes are extremely important. The U.S. is not just going to give up on it immediately. And so I don't think that they will end all support unless we really push very, very hard. I echo what Hassan said earlier, that maybe this is the time to push harder than we ever had, right? And I was going to say something else. Bottom line is that he is not ending this because of sympathy for the Yemeni people, right? He's not ending it because, of inconvenience. I've been worried for a long time, and Hassan and I have had multiple conversations about this, that he will just try to create some kind of backdoor deal with the Saudis and try to get away with just giving them something, whether that's partitioning Yemen, giving them Ma'rib, which is what they really, really want, the northern province. It's oil rich. Maybe giving them parts of, UAE has been occupying some extremely important Yemeni islands, negotiating that kind of deal with his allies so that they can try to save face and say, well, we at least got something. But yeah, they've been losing this war with all of the weapons and all of the intelligence and all of the support that they've had over 6 years. They've been losing this war because you can't win a war from the sky. You can't bomb people into submission. We've seen that in Vietnam, right? And so, I don't think Biden is in it for the right reasons, despite what he's saying. But we really need to push very, very hard to expose why the U.S. is there in the first place. Not accept the talking points that we're there to defend Saudi Arabian territory, and really push for an end to all forms of U.S. support.
Shireen, that's fantastic. I completely agree. If I may add a couple minor points here. The war powers resolution works. Forcing votes, I think, activist pressure, forcing votes and getting people to go on record. I mean, if we follow it in a straight line, there was that Saudi cluster bomb vote in 2016. We only got 29 people to vote for that. We essentially split the caucus. We lost pretty badly. But that was a starting place. And then we built on that. In 2018, we got 44 votes in the Senate on a War Powers Act that Senator Bernie Sanders and Mike Lee and Murphy introduced. And then and then that tragic bus bombing happened, Khashoggi happened, the humanitarian suffering, just escalated. And then we were able to pass it and get it across the finish line. And to me, I just draw a straight line for all of these congressional votes and all of this pressure that we put on as to why we got here. I echo the sentiment that I don't think this happens without all of that. Now, I think if I'm going to read the tea leaves, what I see is Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel. They have this concerted effort to try to keep the U.S. Bogged down in the Middle East. I wouldn't say bogged. They probably wouldn't say bogged down, but so they want to benefit off the U.S. security umbrella, and they have a vested interest in making sure that Iran is the bad guy and Iran's proxies are the bad guy, and that we stay. When I say we, I mean the U.S. government stays militarily engaged. And weapon sales are a part of that. The Abraham Accords are a part of that. But it's this larger thing. And we have to ask, as the American public, is this really serving the United States? Is this serving our national security? You know my answer to that. I don't think it does. I think it's destabilizing the Middle East. And, we really have to re-examine our priorities and not try to play a leadership role in the Middle East. And with the appointment of Envoy Tim Lenderking, I think his role should be to try to get other U.S. allies like France, UK, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Canada, and others to stop their military participation and let Yemeni dialogues flourish. There is a strong effort right now in the administration to try to return to the Iran nuclear deal. I think ending support for the Saudi UAE-led war in Yemen, I'm hoping, is something that, while not a precondition for returning to the Iran nuclear deal on a compliance for compliance basis, I think it can play, hopefully, a cooling. It can cool temperatures. The maximum pressure campaign has been really crippling on Iran. The sanctions that we've put on the Iranian people, blocking the flow of medicine, blocking the vaccine and PPE, and shutting down their oil sector. When we pulled out of the deal and they were in full compliance. So what I'm hoping is that at the as we're ending the Yemen war, we can also restore diplomacy with Iran and just really create the foundation for broader diplomacy. But that also needs a lot of attention. I was really pleased to see Massachusetts Peace Action do an action alert today on the Iran nuclear deal. I think Brian's name was attached to that, so I encourage folks to see them, as two really important priorities that unfortunately are linked, but that's what we're dealing with here. We have to resolve both of these things at the same time.
Yes, and we certainly heard during the president's remarks on Thursday, he immediately linked Yemen and Iran. I just put in the chat a link for an alert to encourage an immediate return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. The clock is ticking on that as well, and we need an immediate return to that. We saw during the Trump administration, we were at the brink of what would be a catastrophic war with Iran multiple times. So I encourage you to send a message to the president and to members of Congress as well, encouraging a quick return to the JCPOA. It's really necessary and is connected to the war in Yemen. I want to give you both the chance to leave us with any final thoughts that you may have. Hassan?
Just wanted to say how much of a pleasure it was to be on this panel with Shireen. I always learn something new when I'm around her. I encourage folks to follow her on Twitter, and if she tells you to do something, just do it. Don't ask questions. Just do what she tells you. And I also am just so happy that Massachusetts Peace Action exists and that you guys are doing such important work in the Raytheon anti-war campaign. It's really just been an incredible, 4 years for me of activism with so many of you, and we did something pretty historical together. And we've got a lot of work to do, but we should also give ourselves a moment to breathe and just say that our voices matter and that we are making a real difference, and it's a seismic difference here. And let's just keep working together.
Thanks, Hassan. Shireen?
I echo everything. Follow Hassan on Twitter. He does amazing work and is, really helped me learn a lot about what's going on in DC. I've never been to DC, but I know a lot about what's happening there through Hassan. I just want to echo, this has been an honor, a pleasure to speak with you, to see so many familiar faces and names. I think it's important to remember, the war started with just an announcement by the Saudi-led coalition from DC, an announcement from the White House, and there you go. And here we are 6 years later. Ending it is not as easy as starting it, but we can't give up. We've gone through so much worse, and we're finally seeing some progress. But until those 30 million Yemenis back home don't have to worry about bombs, don't have to worry about food, aren't being starved to death by our country, by our taxpayers, then we can't really stop. This fight is for them, and we just have to keep going. So I appreciate all of the energy you've put into this, and if you need a moment to find some more energy, do whatever you need to do to keep working toward this cause. It's difficult but worthwhile.
Absolutely, well said. And I think that as we celebrate this victory, which is only one on the path to an ultimate victory of completely ending this war in Yemen, we should allow that to rejuvenate us. Our activism matters. It makes a difference. And what we have just seen in the past week is that we can win. We're not there yet, but what we're doing makes a difference. So I would encourage everyone on this call. I put the link in the chat and our next meeting time, and there'll be a follow-up email with all of this information. There was so much great and valuable information shared in this call tonight. I would encourage you to join the Raytheon anti-war campaign, to join Massachusetts Peace Action, to join your local Peace Action affiliate. If you're calling in from a different part of the country, please do follow Hassan on Twitter, follow Shireen. I'll be sending that information out in the follow-up email as well. And do click those links and send a message to the White House. Let them know that you're paying attention and that you expect them to do these things, and that you're going to hold them to account and demand that we end our support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen immediately, that we do not commit ourselves to the defense of what President Joe Biden himself once called a pariah state and one of the worst human rights abusers the world over. So once again, I want to thank Hassan and Shireen for joining us on such short notice to celebrate with us and also to inform our work going forward. And thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.